I buried my face in the expensive Italian wool coats hanging in Mr. Gallo's walk-in closet, desperately trying to muffle my sobs against the luxurious fabric that probably cost more than everything I owned combined, when the bedroom door suddenly opened and flooded the small space with golden lamplight that made me freeze in absolute horror. Standing there in the entrance to his private suite, filling the entire doorway with his imposing 6'4" frame that always made the air feel electric and dangerous, was Marino Gallo himself, the most feared Mafia boss in New York. The man whose sheets I changed every Tuesday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. The man whose dark, penetrating eyes could make politicians confess their sins, wearing nothing but black dress pants and an unbuttoned white shirt that revealed the intricate tattoos covering his chest, his expression shifting from lethal calculation to something I'd never witnessed cross his devastatingly handsome face before. Raw, unfiltered concern. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from. That's how I'll know you truly liked it. Even if you're watching on your TV, grab a second to join this family of fans who love emotional and heartfelt stories. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you even more tales like this. For 6 months, I had perfected the art of invisibility, the flawless phantom housekeeper. The woman who never flinched when blood-stained suits appeared in the laundry, who never questioned the meetings that lasted until dawn, or the hushed phone calls about shipments and territories, who kept my head down and my hands busy even when my employer's violent world pressed against the edges of my carefully ordered existence like a knife against skin. I had been so disciplined, so painfully careful, maintaining his pristine Manhattan estate with precision and silence, keeping my forbidden attraction to him locked away so deep beneath layers of starch and bleach that I almost convinced myself it wasn't slowly consuming me from the inside out. But tonight, everything was shattering like crystal hitting marble. And the one person I never wanted to witness me broken was staring at me with an intensity that made my already thundering heart threaten to crack my ribs apart. "Ava," he said, and the way my name sounded in that deep, commanding voice that usually issued orders about eliminating problems and cleaning up situations made something inside my chest splinter even wider, because there was a tenderness there I'd never heard before, a softness that seemed impossible coming from a man who'd reportedly executed a rival family's underboss in his own restaurant without breaking a sweat. He stepped into the closet, which suddenly felt suffocatingly intimate with his broad shoulders and powerful frame consuming all the space, and I watched through tear-blurred vision as his hand instinctively moved to the gun holstered beneath his shirt before stopping mid-motion, his tattooed fingers flexing instead as he reached out with one large, scarred hand to grip my chin with shocking gentleness, tilting my face up, so I had no choice but to meet those obsidian eyes that seemed to strip away every wall I'd ever constructed. "Who made you cry?" he asked, his Italian accent thickening with barely restrained violence. "And how would you like their body disposed of?" The question should have terrified me, should have reminded me exactly what kind of man I worked for, what kind of darkness lived behind those perfectly tailored suits and that calculating mind. But instead, something hot and desperate bloomed in my chest, because for the first time in my entire life, someone was offering to carry my burdens, to eliminate my problems with the kind of permanent finality that only a man like Marino Gallo could deliver. I opened my mouth to lie, to deflect it as nothing, to maintain the professional distance that had kept me safe and employed for these past 6 months. But the words withered on my tongue when I saw the way his jaw clenched, the way his other hand curled into a fist at his side as if he was physically restraining himself from hunting down whoever had caused my tears right this second. And I realized with startling, terrifying clarity that lying to him now would be impossible, because he would see through it the way he saw through everything else, every deception, every weakness, every carefully hidden truth. "It's nothing, Mr. Gallo," I whispered, the lie tasting like ash on my tongue as I tried to step back, tried to create even an inch of distance between us in the confined space, but his grip on my chin tightened just enough to keep me anchored there. Just a personal issue. I apologize for the disruption. I'll finish the guest suites now and... Stop, he commanded, and the single word carried enough weight to silence me instantly. His thumb traced along my jawline with deliberate slowness, and I watched something dark and possessive flash across his face. You think I haven't been paying attention? You think I don't notice everything that happens in my home, Ava? My heart stuttered because there was an edge to his voice now, something that felt like anger but burned hotter, more personal, more dangerous in ways that made my skin prickle with awareness I didn't want to examine too closely. For 6 months, I've watched you move through these rooms like a ghost, he continued, his eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made me feel exposed, vulnerable, seen in ways I'd spent half a year trying to avoid. Never a hair out of place. Never a trembling hand even when my associates tracked blood across the marble you'd just cleaned. Never a single tear, even when Luca came in at 3 in the morning covered in blood from the Brooklyn job, and you simply asked if he wanted coffee. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with the realization that he'd been watching me far more carefully than I'd ever imagined, cataloging every moment, every controlled reaction, every breath I'd taken in his dangerous orbit. So when I find you hiding in my closet crying like your entire world is collapsing, he said, his voice dropping to something low and absolutely lethal, don't insult my intelligence by pretending it's nothing, because we both know better. His other hand came up to frame my face, and I felt trapped, pinned by his gaze and his proximity and the terrifying truth that I wanted to surrender to this, to him, to whatever he was offering with his protective fury and his dark promises. You've cleaned my home, touched my things, breathed my air for half a year, he said, each word deliberate and weighted with meaning I couldn't fully process. That makes you mine, Ava. And when something of mine is threatened, I eliminate the threat. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Mine to protect. As if I belonged to him. As if 6 months of keeping his home had somehow transferred ownership of my entire existence into his scarred, capable hands. My brother. I choked out, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks.
Ethan.
He's 19. The Kosloff family has him. The change that came over Marino was terrifying in its completeness, like watching a mask slip away to reveal something ancient and merciless beneath. His hands dropped from my face, and his entire body went rigid with a cold fury that made the temperature in the room seem to plummet, his jaw clenching so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin as he reached for his phone with movements that were almost unnaturally controlled. $300,000, I continued, the words tumbling out now in a desperate rush because maybe if he understood the full scope of the debt, he would see how impossible this was. How far beyond saving. My mother's cancer treatments, the experimental drugs the insurance wouldn't cover, I tried to pay it back, but the interest kept compounding, and then Victor Kosloff bought the debt, and now he is Ethan in some warehouse, and they're going to... Marino pressed a number on his phone, and when someone answered on the first ring, his voice was pure ice and violence, each word falling like a death sentence.
Luca.
Full mobilization against the Kosloff organization, he said, and the casual finality of it made my blood run cold. I want every man we have armed and on standby within the hour. I call in the crews from Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island. Everyone. We're going to war.
No.
The word burst from my throat before I could stop it, panic flooding every nerve as the reality of what I'd just unleashed crashed over me like a tidal wave. I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into the hard muscle beneath his shirt, trying to pull the phone away. Mr. Gallo, please, I shouldn't have said anything. This is my problem to handle. I'll figure something out. I want surveillance on every Kosloff property within 30 minutes, he continued as if I hadn't spoken, his free hand coming up to grip my wrist, not hard enough to hurt but firm enough to keep me from interfering. Bank accounts, shell companies, safe houses. Everything. And get me a location on Victor immediately. Please, I begged, my voice breaking as tears blurred my vision again, hot and desperate and terrified. Please don't start a war over my personal problem. I'm not worth this. You can't risk your men and your organization for someone like me. His eyes snapped to mine with such fierce intensity that the words died in my throat, and I saw something in those dark depths that looked like rage, but not at me, never at me. Understood, boss. Luca's voice came through the speaker, professional and calm despite the magnitude of what was being ordered. Marino ended the call with a single tap, then pulled me closer, his voice absolutely final when he spoke. It stopped being personal the moment they touched someone under my roof. The silence that followed felt heavy, charged with something electric and dangerous that made my skin prickle with awareness. Marino's hands were still on me, one gripping my wrist and the other sliding up to cup the side of my neck, his thumb resting against my pulse point where my heart was hammering so hard I knew he could feel it. Do you know when I first noticed you, Ava? He asked, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less intense, and the sudden shift in tone caught me so off guard that I could only stare at him with wide, confused eyes. Your first day. You walked into this house with your second-hand uniform and your careful posture, and I watched you organize my study without being asked. I blinked, trying to understand why he was telling me this now, why we were standing in his closet talking about my first day when he'd just declared war on one of the most dangerous crime families in New York. I tested you that first week, he continued, his thumb stroking slowly along my jaw in a way that made coherent thought nearly impossible. Left blood-stained clothes where you'd find them. Had associates discuss violent business while you cleaned nearby. Watched to see if you'd flinch, if you'd ask questions, if you'd run. I needed the job, I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew it was more complicated than that. Knew that somewhere in those early days I'd made a choice to stay even when every instinct screamed that I should leave. You never flinched, he said, and there was something in his expression that looked almost like wonder. Never asked a single question. Just moved through my chaos bringing order, making my world cleaner, quieter, better. Like you were meant to be here. His other hand came up to frame my face, and I felt myself swaying toward him despite everything, despite the danger and the impossibility and the fact that my brother was being held hostage because this man had developed feelings he couldn't hide. I've been fixated on you since that first day, Ava, he confessed, the words raw and honest in a way that made my chest ache. Everything you carry now belongs to me, your debts, your fears, your brother's life. All of it. Mine to protect, mine to fix, mine to claim. The possessiveness in those words should have terrified me, but instead I found myself leaning into the dangerous warmth of his touch, drawn to the promise of protection I'd never had before. Pier 47, I heard myself whisper, surrendering. Warehouse 12B. The basement. Marino's eyes blazed with grim satisfaction. Good girl. Before I could process what was happening, before I could think or question or retreat back into the safety of professional distance, Marino pulled me fully against him in an embrace that felt less like comfort and more like a claiming, his arms wrapping around me with a possessiveness that stole the breath from my lungs. I could feel the solid warmth of him through the thin fabric of his shirt, could smell expensive cologne mixed with cigarette smoke and something uniquely him, and when he spoke again, his voice rumbled through his chest directly into mine. You're not my maid anymore, Ava, he murmured against my hair, and the finality in those words made me tremble. You're under my protection, in my home, and very soon in my bed. Heat flooded through me at the promise, at the absolute certainty in his tone that left no room for negotiation or refusal, and I knew I should pull away, should maintain some semblance of boundaries. But my hands were already fisting in his shirt like he was the only anchor in a world that had turned to quicksand. I can't stay here, I protested weakly, even as my body betrayed me by pressing closer. I have my apartment in Queens, I need my things. Your apartment with the broken lock on the fire escape window, he interrupted, and ice flooded my veins. The one where you've been getting threatening letters shoved under your door? Where someone followed you home last Tuesday and waited across the street for 20 minutes before my man scared him off. I jerked back to stare at him, shock and confusion warring on my face. What are you talking about? You never noticed because I made sure you didn't have to, he said, his hand coming up to cup the back of my neck with a gentleness that contradicted the dark reality of his words. I've known about your mother's death since your 3rd month here, Ava. The collection agencies, the loan sharks circling, the ones who started making house calls. My mind reeled, trying to comprehend what he was telling me, trying to reconcile the careful invisibility I'd maintained with the truth that I'd been seen, watched, protected all along. Every collector who came to your door found a better offer waiting, he continued, his thumb stroking along my pulse point. Every threat was redirected to one of my shell companies. Every payment extension was arranged through channels you never knew existed. Tears burned behind my eyes again, but this time they weren't from fear or desperation. They were from the overwhelming realization that I hadn't been alone, that someone had been standing between me and the darkness without asking for anything in return. Why? I whispered. His answer was simple, absolute. Because you were already mine. Marino guided me out of the closet and toward the massive bed that dominated his suite, sitting me down on the edge before kneeling in front of me so we were eye level, his hands resting on my thighs in a gesture that felt both grounding and impossibly intimate. For a long moment he just looked at me, and I watched something painful flicker across his normally unreadable face, a shadow of old grief that made him seem almost human. I had a sister, he said quietly, and the confession hit me like a physical blow because I'd never heard him speak about family, never heard anything in his voice except command and control. Isabella. She was 20 when the Calabrese family decided to send me a message about territorial disputes. They took her from her apartment in Brooklyn, kept her for 3 days before they left her body on my doorstep. My hands moved of their own accord, reaching out to cover his where they rested on my legs, and he turned his palms up to catch my fingers, holding them with surprising gentleness. I was 23, he continued, his jaw clenching with the memory. Still building my organization, still learning that in this world, caring about someone makes you vulnerable. That love is a weapon your enemies will use to cut you open and bleed you dry. Marino, I whispered, aching for the young man who'd learned that lesson in the cruelest way possible. I swore after Isabella that I would never let anyone get close enough to matter, he said, his accent thickening with emotion. That I would build my empire on fear and control, on being untouchable. And for 15 years, I kept that promise. His grip on my hands tightened, and I saw something fierce and almost vulnerable flash in his eyes. Until you, he said, and those 2 words carried the weight of confession. 3 weeks ago, one of my soldiers made a comment about you. Something crude, disrespectful. I had him dealt with. Permanently. And Viktor Kozlov heard about it. The realization crashed over me like ice water. He took Ethan because of me, I choked out. Because he figured out. Because he figured out you're my weakness, Marino finished, his voice hardening with self-directed anger. This is on me, Ava. I put you in danger by caring too much, by showing it too openly. He stood abruptly, pulling me up with him, his hands framing my face with fierce intensity. But understand this, he said, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Touching you or anyone you love is suicide. I will make sure everyone knows it. Starting with Viktor Kozlov. The weight of what he was offering settled over me like a heavy cloak, both terrifying and strangely comforting, and I found myself asking the question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. What will this cost me? I whispered, my voice barely audible in the charged silence between us. Your protection. This war you're starting. What do you want in return? Marino's expression shifted into something darker, more possessive, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones with deliberate slowness as he held my gaze with an intensity that made my knees weak. Everything, he said simply. You stay here, in my home, permanently. You accept that you belong to me now, not as my employee, not as some temporary arrangement, but as mine in every way that matters. And you understand that there is no going back to who you were before, Ava. Once you cross this line with me, once you let me claim you, there's no returning to your quiet life in Queens pretending we're nothing to each other. My breath caught in my throat because this was it, the moment where I had to choose between the safety of invisibility and the dangerous promise of being seen, claimed, protected by a man who could destroy entire organizations with a phone call. Before I could answer, before I could process the magnitude of what he was demanding, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his jaw clenching as he read whatever message had just come through, and I watched his expression harden into something lethal. Luca's intelligence confirms Kozlov is planning to move your brother, he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. 24 hours. He's taking Ethan to a fortified location upstate, somewhere we can't easily reach. Terror flooded through me, cold and paralyzing. 24 hours, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Which means we strike tonight, Marino said, tucking his phone away and gripping my shoulders with both hands, forcing me to focus on him, on the absolute certainty in his dark eyes. But I need you to understand something before I make this move, before I mobilize my entire organization and go to war with the Kozlov family. He leaned down until our foreheads were almost touching, his breath warm against my lips. Once I do this, once I go to war for you, Ava, you belong to me completely, he said, each word a binding contract written in blood and violence. Forever. No escape, no second thoughts, no walking away. You become mine in every sense of the word, and I will never let you go. The promise should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like salvation. I looked into those dark, intense eyes that had haunted my dreams for 6 months, at the man who'd been silently protecting me while I pretended not to notice the way my heart raced every time he entered a room. And I made the only choice that had ever really existed. Bring Ethan home, Marino, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands, despite the knowledge that I was signing away every piece of my old life with these words. And I'm yours. Whatever that means, whatever it costs me, I'm yours. The change in his expression was instantaneous and devastating, something possessive and triumphant and almost reverent flooding his features before he closed the distance between us and claimed my mouth with a kiss that felt like a brand, like ownership, like a promise sealed in fire and need. His hands tangled in my hair as he angled my head exactly where he wanted it, his lips demanding and possessive against mine in a way that made my knees buckle and my fingers clutch desperately at his shirt. When he finally pulled back, I was breathless and dizzy and completely ruined for any other man who might have existed in the world. Mine, he murmured against my lips, and the single word carried the weight of absolute certainty. His phone buzzed again, breaking the spell, and I watched as he read the message with an expression that shifted from satisfaction to something darker, more dangerous. He was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as he processed whatever information Luca had sent, before his eyes lifted back to mine. There's one condition to the exchange, he said, his voice carefully controlled in a way that told me I wasn't going to like what came next. Victor wants me to bring you personally to the warehouse. He wants confirmation that you're the source of my weakness, wants to see with his own eyes what I'm willing to go to war for. Ice flooded my veins, but I forced myself to nod, to accept this new reality. Then I'll go with you. No, Marino said immediately, his grip on me tightening. I'll handle Victor. You stay here where it's safe. You just told me I belong to you now, I interrupted, surprised by the strength in my own voice. Which means Ethan belongs to you too. I won't hide while you fight for my family. Something fierce and proud flashed in his eyes, and he pulled me close again, his lips brushing against my temple as he spoke. That, Bella Mia, he murmured, his voice dark with promise, was the last mistake Victor Kozlov will ever make. The restaurant was a high-end establishment in Midtown that Marino owned through one of his shell corporations, cleared of all other patrons for this meeting, with armed men stationed at every entrance and exit. I stood at Marino's side in one of the dresses he'd had delivered to his suite, black silk that clung to my body like a second skin, marking me clearly as his feeling. Viktor Kozlov's cold blue eyes assessed me like I was a piece of property being appraised. "So this is the maid who brought down the great Marino Gallo," Viktor said in his heavy Russian accent, a cruel smile playing at his lips as he sat across from us at the table, two of his men flanking him like guard dogs. I must admit, I expected someone more impressive. Marino's hand tightened on my waist in warning, the only sign of his barely controlled rage. "You have something that belongs to me," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Name your terms for the exchange." Viktor leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he studied us with calculating intensity. "The boy is unharmed, as promised. But before I return him, I require insurance that you won't immediately retaliate the moment he's safe." "What kind of insurance?" Marino demanded, though I could feel the tension coiling through his body like a spring wound too tight. "One evening," Viktor said, his eyes sliding to me with predatory interest that made my skin crawl. "The lovely Ava spends dinner with me tomorrow night. Alone. As my guest. Consider it collateral for your good behavior." The explosion was instantaneous. Marino was on his feet before I could blink, his hand going to the gun at his waist as his men moved into position around the room. "You're out of your fucking mind if you think I'm letting you anywhere near her," he snarled, his accent thickening with fury. "I will burn every Kozlov property to ash. I will hunt down every member of your organization. I will." "I'll do it," I said, my voice cutting through his rage like a knife through silk. The room went utterly silent. Marino's head snapped toward me, his expression a mixture of shock and absolute denial. "Ava, no." "One dinner," I said, holding Viktor's gaze even though fear was turning my blood to ice. "In a public place. And then Ethan goes free. Unharmed." Viktor's smile widened. "You have spirit. I can see why he's obsessed." "We have a deal," I said before Marino could protest further. Marino grabbed my arm, pulling me close, his voice a low, dangerous growl meant only for me. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," I whispered back. "For Ethan." He turned back to Viktor, his expression carved from stone and murder. "Understand this, Kozlov, I don't fight to win. I fight to completely annihilate anyone who threatens what belongs to me." The exchange happened at midnight at the same warehouse where Ethan was being held, but something felt wrong the moment we arrived. Marino must have sensed it too, because his hand never left the small of my back, his body positioned protectively between me and Viktor's men as they brought Ethan out, bruised but alive. His eyes going wide when he saw me standing next to the most dangerous man in New York. "The boy, as promised," Viktor said, but there was something in his smile that made my blood run cold. "And now, about our dinner arrangement." Everything happened at once. One of Viktor's enforcers raised his weapon, the barrel aimed directly at Marino's back while he was distracted watching Ethan. Time seemed to slow as my hand moved to the gun Marino had pressed into my palm before we'd entered, the weight of it familiar from the hours he'd spent teaching me to shoot in his private range that afternoon, his hands guiding mine. His voice steady as he'd whispered that he would never let me face danger unprepared. I pulled the trigger. The enforcer dropped, blood blooming across his chest, and the warehouse erupted into chaos. Marino spun toward me, his expression a mixture of shock, fierce pride, and absolute possessive satisfaction as his men moved to secure Viktor and neutralize the remaining threat. But his eyes never left mine, dark and intense and burning with something that looked like worship. "Ava," he breathed, closing the distance between us and framing my face with both hands, kissing me hard and deep right there in the middle of the bloodshed and violence. "My beautiful, brave Ava." Ethan was pulled to safety by Luca while Marino's organization dismantled what remained of the Kozlov operation with surgical precision. Later, when my brother was being treated by Marino's private doctor, he'd look at me with new understanding in his eyes and say quietly, "You're in love with him. Completely, irrevocably in love with the Mafia boss who went to war for you." And I couldn't deny it. 3 months later, I stood in Marino's bedroom, our bedroom, watching the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, my hand resting on the barely there swell of my stomach where our child grew. I was no longer the invisible maid who'd hidden her feelings behind professionalism and fear. I was Ava Gallo now, claimed and transformed, having found my truest strength not in spite of the darkness, but because I'd had the courage to embrace it. Marino's arms wrapped around me from behind, his lips finding the curve of my neck. "No regrets, Bella Mia," he murmured. I leaned back into his warmth, into his dangerous love that had saved me in every way that mattered. Not a single one. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories. Your comments mean the world to me. Let me know what you thought and what kind of stories you'd like to see next. Until next time, keep reading and stay mysterious.